Lori Matheson. I'm the director of the University of Illinois Press, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to our 8th biannual University of Illinois Press Publishing Symposium. For this welcome, I'm stepping in for Dr. Joanna Groden, who's the Vice Chancellor for Research at UI Chicago, and she had a last-minute conflict, so unfortunately couldn't join us today. But I'm very happy to welcome you in her place, and on behalf of all of our panelists and my colleagues at the University of Illinois Press. Before we get underway, I want to take a moment to acknowledge our status as a land-grant institution and also to thank our sponsors. We recognize and acknowledge that the University of Illinois system carries out its mission in its namesake state of Illinois, which includes ancestral lands of the Peoria, Kaskaskia, Waukesha, Wea, Miami, Mascutine, Odawa, Sauk, Meskwaki, Kickapoo, Potawatomi, Ojibwe, and Chickasaw nations. We have a responsibility to acknowledge these Native nations and to work with them as we move forward as a vibrant, inclusive institution. Second, I'm grateful to acknowledge the ongoing support of our administrative partners at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign and the University of Illinois Chicago. At UIUC, the Office of the Vice Chancellor for Research and Innovation, the Office of the Vice President for Academic Affairs, and the Humanities Research Institute, and at UIC, the Office of the Vice Chancellor for Research, the Institute for the Humanities, and the University Library. I also want to thank our panelists, as well as Heather Gernentz and Gary Smith at the University of Illinois Press for their behind-the-scenes work on this event. As a scholarly publisher housed within a land-grant institution, we have a large public service component to our mission, and these symposia are part of living out that role. The goals for our symposia include sharing publishing best practices with faculty and illuminating the black box of publishing processes, bringing together scholars and publishing professionals for conversations about best practices and strategies, and tapping the experience and expertise of U of I Press staff, colleagues at other presses, and faculty from the U of I and elsewhere. For this edition of our symposium, we're offering a pair of sessions on publishing and career development. First, how to make smart publishing decisions to help you thrive in your academic career. And second, how to pursue publishing as a career. Our first session today, entitled Moving Up, Publishing Strategies for Career Advancement in the Academy, is designed to help scholars make informed decisions about what to publish, when and where, and to share best practices about what publishing roles to take on at different junctures of your careers. Publishing is a vital component of advancement for academics in many fields, and the decisions scholars make about spending their limited time and intellectual resources are crucial to professional success, both in terms of teaching and research positions and in terms of reputation and impact on the field. There are many factors to consider when making decisions about publishing, and best practices differ from one domain of scholarship or one academic field to another. Our panelists will provide inside information about how different types of publishing outputs and activities are weighted by tenure, promotion, and hiring committees, how to assess the credentials of publishers and publishing outlets, and many other issues. This session aims to help junior faculty position themselves for success in terms of publication and the promotion and tenure process, as well as how non-tenure track and contingent faculty can develop publishing strategies that will support their career development. Our panelists today include faculty from the health sciences, social sciences, and humanities, and I'm very excited at the diverse perspectives they're going to bring us on the topic of publishing smart for academic career success. With that, let me turn it over to our first panel and our chair, Jackie Chriqui.
Hi, everyone. Thanks very much, Lori. It's our pleasure to be here today. I'm Jamie Chriqui. I'm the Senior Associate Dean and Professor in Health Policy Administration at the School of Public Health at the University of Illinois, Chicago. I'm delighted to be joined by three incredible colleagues and women. So let me let them each introduce themselves and give you a brief little bio on their perspective that's relevant for today's session. And then I'll provide my perspective, and then we'll move into a series of questions. We have some initial questions that we'll be posing to each panelist. And then we also encourage you to put your questions into the Q&A box or the Q&A panel, not in the chat panel, but in the Q&A panel. And that way we will be able to get to those as well. Feel free to send the questions in the Q&A panel throughout the symposium, and we will do our best to get to as many as we can before the end of the session. So let me turn it over to Stephanie, if you want to briefly introduce yourself.
I do. Thank you, Jamie. Hi, everybody. My name is Stephanie Crawford, University of Illinois at Chicago, UIC. I describe myself as an educator, researcher, pharmacist, and public health advocate. I am the Executive Associate Dean for Faculty Affairs and Strategic Initiatives at our college and a professor in the Department of Pharmacy Systems, Outcomes, and Policy. My research interests focus on health equity, access and disparities reduction in safe and effective medication use. In service, a little piece of me is in all of your medication or medicine cabinets, I should say. For the past 25 years and the last 7 years as chair, I've served on the United States Pharmacopoeia Expert Committee on Nomenclature and Labeling, which by federal laws, even though it's an NGO, establishes the official title of all drug products in the United States. These are non-proprietary. So if you don't like the name of your drug, send me a note. We'll take care of it. I was also a charter member of the US FDA Advisory Committee on Drug Safety and Risk Management. And I say this because it's related to my publishing areas. And just like a bad drug, that was from 2003 to 2006. Just like a bad drug, I continue to be recalled for service every now and then, including last month. In terms of promotion and tenure, which publishing research and scholarship is a big deal. Like many on this panel, I've served in multiple roles. I've chaired the departmental mid-probationary review for tenure system faculty. I've served numerous terms on our College of Pharmacy Promotion and Tenure Committee, including chair. I had the pleasure of serving with Jamie, and she'll say more about her role on the all-campus P&T committee, where we're elected by campus. In my current administrative position, for which I have 40% appointment, first job in that description is to advocate for faculty. So I liaise with the department heads and other unit designees as they're preparing the faculty dossiers. I staff the P&T committee meetings. After those meetings, comments are provided back to the department heads for clarification or correction. The dean for my college and I receive the evaluative write-ups on each faculty candidate for P&T. Dean writes his draft letter, does an excellent job, sends it to me. I look at it one more time with a new set of eyes, where I look at the P&T committee notes again, go through the dossiers individually to ensure all relevant info is included in the dean's letter before he finalizes it and sends it to campus. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Stephanie. Great to have you here. Julie?
Hi, everybody. It's great to be here. I'm very pleased. Thank you for inviting me. I'm a professor of history at the University of Maryland, College Park. My research interests concern United States and global labor and working class history and immigration. I'm wearing a few different hats or different ways of connecting to this topic. I have a book forthcoming that I co-edited that's coming out with the University of Illinois Press. So I've worked with the press in that way. I am one of the series editors of a great series at the University of Illinois Press, Working Class in American History, that's existed now for about 42 years. And I also, at the University of Maryland, served on our Campus Promotion and Tenure Committee for 3 years, one of those years as chair of the committee. So I'm familiar in that sense with the process of P&T. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Julie. Pleasure to have you here. And last but not least, Amanda.
Hi, everybody. My name is Amanda Lewis. I'm the director of the Institute for Research on Race and Public Policy here at UIC, and also a professor in Black Studies and in sociology. So I'm wearing a hat as a social scientist today. I'm also wearing a hat as a member of an interdisciplinary unit on campus, which has its own particularities. And I'm also wearing my hat as the director of the Research Institute. And a lot of what we do is faculty development, trying to help faculty and emerging scholars who want to increase the impact of their research in terms of issues of public engagement. And so we do a lot of supporting of folks who are doing writing and doing publishing and want to make sure people see their work and hear about it and that it has an impact in the world. In terms of my own research, my work is on race and racial dynamics, both in schools and in society. And I've published both book-length manuscripts, edited volumes, and journals and reports and all that kind of stuff. So I'll be bringing those different perspectives to the conversation. So thanks for having me.
Super. Thanks so much, Amanda. And I'll just quickly give a little tiny bio about myself. So as Senior Associate Dean in the School of Public Health at UIC, I oversee all aspects of the research, teaching, and service enterprise. So everything related to faculty development and their career trajectory fall under one of the associate deans who work with me. As Stephanie alluded, I co-chaired the UIC Campus P&T Committee for the past 3 years, and I've been chairing our college committee for a number of years prior to that as well. I am a policy researcher, public health policy researcher, and I'm a political science and policy scientist by training. I study the implementation impact of laws and policies across the country on communities, on schools, and on individual level outcomes. So I sort of bridge the gap between social sciences and the health sciences. So I'm excited to be here as well. So with that, let's jump right in. Panelists, we have a mix of faculty in today's session, including people from the non-tenure track, from the tenure track, and from a variety of disciplines. We have adjuncts as well. If you could each discuss the role of publishing from your perspective in your respective disciplines relative to the P&T process, that would be super. What are some of the primary types of publishing that are most valued or weighted in your discipline? And let's start with Julie, and then we'll go to Amanda and Stephanie.
Sure. So as a humanities scholar, I would say it's quite different for us as compared to the sciences or the social sciences. In history, and I think in most of the humanities, there's really a requirement, generally speaking, that you publish a book for promotion to associate and a second book for promotion to full professor. Particularly for that first level, from assistant to associate professor, it really, really helps if you have 1 or 2 articles in addition to the book. But the book is everything. It's really the key to promotion and tenure. It also, you know, there are issues to think about in terms of choosing a press. So you want to think in terms of a press that is strong in the area that you're publishing, because people tend to look to different presses to see what books are coming out. That's really important. Sometimes people ask, is it appropriate to think about publishing with a trade press rather than academic press? And my general advice is usually it's better to go with an academic press. Particularly for your first book. For second book, it doesn't really matter that much, but for first book, it helps the P&T committees if they know that the book has been sent out to anonymous referees. So that would be my quick take on these issues.
Super, thanks very much, Julie. Amanda?
Yeah, you know, it is interesting. I think it's I think probably what most of us are going to say is it's really important to pay attention to what's going on around you and talk to your colleagues, because the norms in sociology and social sciences generally really vary. So we have people in our department who are book writers, and I think in general, if you're doing qualitative or ethnographic, certain kinds of research that are appropriate for that, we would expect a book and generally expect probably a few articles on top of that. But then there are other people who are article writers and they're never going to write a book, and that's fine. So I think, and being in Black Studies, you know, one of the things we really try to do is have a lot of conversations along the way with folks about what the expectations and what the expectations of some people are coming out of disciplines. So we have historians who are, you know, the expectation is, as Julie said, that they will write a book. And then there are other folks who are doing performance studies or other things where some of what they might produce is not a traditional publication in certain ways. And so the really most important thing is to pay attention, as all of us who've been on this campus-wide P&T committees know, are what are the norms and expectations that are written into the departmental bylaws, and to really have a lot of conversations with colleagues along the way about that. But I think all the questions that Julie raised about paying attention to the outlets for your work, if you're publishing books, really paying attention to which kind of presses are, it's not just even about the impact, but also we've run into issues with presses before in terms of the timeliness of the process, in terms of how does it align with the P&T process. There can be some pretty sticky situations if a press is not on your calendar in terms of how quickly a book is going to come out, especially for promotion. So I think the both of the units I'm in have a fair amount of diversity in terms of what people are publishing, but I will say there are some, it's pretty clear if you're publishing articles that you're doing a couple a year, and if you're doing a book, you're doing a book and a few other things. So I'll pass it along for now.
Thanks, Amanda. Stephanie?
Thank you. In my area within the biomedical sciences, within pharmacy sciences, the big push for us is going to be credible, if you were in the research track or the tenure track, credible journal publications. And we'll probably talk more about that later. In our area, it's far less often that you're going to publish a book. And if you do publish a book, it's probably an edited volume, and which depends a lot on, you know, review and compilation synthesis of the literature. Oftentimes, many of our faculty might do book chapters, but again, just based on the type of research, the timeliness, and how people evaluate it, books are good, but not expected, because not a lot are going to have a book. So it's going to be more of the articles. In those tracks I talked about, research track and tenure track, it's a little different for clinical, and we can talk about that later.
Thanks very much, Stephanie. And in my discipline, public health, it's very similar to what actually a combination of Stephanie and Amanda's answers. We too are predominantly journal oriented, very limited on the scholarly books. However, we also do a lot of annotated volumes. However, we have a lot of researchers who engage in community engaged research and community-based participatory research. And so increasingly, our college has been recognizing other forms of scholarship outside of traditional peer review type of publications. So monographs, briefs, technical reports for community-based organizations. The key there for, and it really is going to depend on your institution and the norms for your college or your unit. But in our case, you know, we really still have expectations for having sort of the scientific methods clearly described. Ideally, those outlets or those types of publications are also have gone through some type of peer review process. So it still sort of meets the rigor of a traditional journal or academic publisher, but it's a different form of outlet that's much more accessible for decision makers and for translation purposes.
Jamie, may we answer a question in the chat, in the Q&A?
Sure.
And the question is, in your respective fields, do reviews count as articles, especially as one approaches the tenure process? I'll just briefly say, yes, in our area, systematic reviews are considered to be research if they're well-conducted. Systematic reviews with or without a meta-analysis. Narrative reviews, yes, they count. Again, they would be really good in some of our clinical tracks, especially. So it depends on the discipline, but do they count? Yes.
Yeah, our next question actually sort of gets at this a little bit, which is about, who wants this dreaded impact question? We all get asked this question all the time about, how can one demonstrate the impact of their work? It's critical for promotion tenure committees. And, obviously we're all in academia working on scholarship and research with the goal of having some type of impact, right? So Amanda, do you want to get us started about sort of how in your discipline, how to address this?
Sure. And I will say, I feel pretty strongly that like the difference, asking this impact question, especially with junior faculty, is tricky. So I think it's really important to think about how it's different for in promotion to associate versus full. And I push back on that all the time in different ways in different units. So I just wanted to say it out loud here. And I think I would also say that scholars need to be prepared to think about and advocate for the particular kind of impact they're trying to have, and to be clear about that in their own writing of their case. Some of the things about this is to kind of frame, one needs to kind of be prepared to kind of frame what your agenda is so people understand what you're prioritizing and how you're operationalizing impact. That said, some of the ways we typically think about, like when I'm talking to junior faculty about publishing, we will talk about impact factor of journals, and or just like the reach of journals. Are you writing for a journal that everybody in the field gets? Are you writing in journal for journals, or submitting to journals that are like the leading journals in subfields? All those things matter a lot, and particularly. But it's tricky because like the top journals in our fields, have acceptance rates below 10% and sometimes can sit on things for months. So, I think you have to be really strategic and hopefully have conversations with mentors about those kinds of things. I think other things that I think clearly demonstrate that people are engaging with your research, which is another way to think about impact, is if you're done a book, is it being reviewed? Are you being invited to speak in different places, to give talks at departments and that sort of things? Are you being included in conferences? Those kinds of things, especially smaller conferences that are by invitation and that sort of thing. I think this question that you raised a little bit, Jamie, about doing engaged research. We work with lots of folks who are doing engaged research with community partners, or doing research that's policy relevant, where they're writing for public audiences or engaging with legislators. And there's a whole range of ways in which, particularly some of our universities really claim that that's a value and they want to support that work. I think it's still a work in progress about how that's actually rewarded and honored in the P&T process. And I think so it's, again, important to be careful and have a lot of conversations with folks about how that work is going to be interpreted. Although I will always put as an asterisk, some people I know really suggest putting off some of that kind of engaged research until after tenure. But I will say that for some of us, doing that kind of research is the whole reason we got into the field, and we wouldn't stay otherwise. So I think being clear on what you're doing and what the questions are that you have, and the goals, for impact are really important to kind of keep front and center. So there's like all the traditional ways and I'm not even going to get into H factor, somebody else can talk about that, or whatever, citation indexes and all that stuff. But I think there are lots of ways to think about and advocate for how you want your work to have impact and how you're going to measure that.
Super. I'm just going to take moderator's prerogative for a minute and just chime in here to follow on to Amanda and Stephanie on 2 points. The first one is about sort of doing some of this non-traditional type of scholarship, whether it's technical reports for community agencies or testimony for legislators or things like that. The most important thing, and the most important message I think all of us are getting at and heading towards, is if you're in an academic setting, and not everyone necessarily on this call is, but if you are, and you're somebody who ultimately is going to go up for some type of promotion or tenure, and you have some type of scholarship requirement, the most important thing is to understand the norms that you're going up under, the promotion tenure norms that you're going up under, because in the example Amanda provided, we actually made a concerted effort in our college last year to completely revise our norms, to recognize all those different types of scholarship as being valued by our school. And so when somebody goes up for promotion who's doing more of this community engaged type work in non-traditional type of scholarship, it's valued in our norms. And so when it gets to the campus level, they also recognize it because they review cases based on what our norms say. So I think that's really important, and work with your mentor, faculty advisor, things like that, to really understand the norms for your college. The second thing about this impact question, which was the question posed in the Q&A about review papers, if you are a junior faculty, a review paper is a great way to get a high impact pretty quickly if you are working in a space that you're pulling together all the literature, and you've done so in a way that the field in general is going to be citing to it as a way of pulling the literature together. So, you know, we didn't really touch on H indices and I indices, and maybe Stephanie wants to do that. But that could be a quick way also to get some quick impact in terms of your citation index. Stephanie.
Thanks, Jamie. I agree with everything that's been said with you and Amanda. H indexes and I-10 indexes, they all could be very important. Notice I say could be very important, as well as, you know, the hip new thing with alt metrics that are used a great deal. So those are going to include some social media citations, or mentions, research blogs, mainstream media, etc. They're all used. But again, remembering that in our discipline, a lot depends on the journals. What if you publish in a niche journal? You know, that's not going to necessarily a large amount of people. What's a person to do? It's very important that you indicate the impact of your research, but it's not necessarily through indexes. It can be through a qualitative description, which Amanda and Jamie were both talking about. When I went up for promotion a while ago, I needed to show impact. If I'd have used just H index or I-10 compared with some of my colleagues, they would have been lower. But you know, I can wax poetic. I could do a little poetry, and I could definitely show some qualitative descriptions that would put it at a high impact compared to some of my colleagues. Everyone was good in their own ways. So for example, though I won't go into the specifics, I could say my contributions involve policy related aspects, ... I noted at that time how my publications had been cited in at least 5 reports by the Institute of Medicine / National Academy of Medicine, a consensus statement, separately a consensus statement of the American Association of Clinical Endocrinology and the American Diabetes Association. You see what I'm doing? I'm trying to say how these national or international groups use them. A position paper within our area, the American Association of Colleges of Pharmacy, the Government Accountability Office, and several professional standards. Also noted how a synopsis of my research, team research, was developed by the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Is still on the site 8 years later. But when I say that, I use whatever I could to show impact that was beyond the traditional metrics. So you always have that option in your research statements.
Thank you. Let's move on. Julie. So obviously this symposium is sponsored by UI Press. Can you talk about book length manuscripts and volumes, you know, about how you map out and frame your book length manuscripts with or without P&T in mind? Like where, for a faculty member who's interested in going down this path and haven't really started there, where would you suggest that they start?
In terms of conceptualizing?
Conceptualizing and sort of, you know, if they're thinking about it relative to P&T and they're in a discipline like humanities where book length volumes are the key thing, you know, where do you suggest they even start?
Right. Well, I think for one thing, it's really great as you're conceptualizing the book, and for in the humanities, this usually means you're conceptualizing, revising a dissertation to turn it into a book. So you already, in a sense, have something already that you've spent, you know, probably at least a couple or more years on researching, writing, thinking about. So really early on, I would say attend conferences and chat with editors, chat with peers or people just a few years ahead of you in their careers who have worked with different presses. Get yourself known and get to know what's out there in terms of different presses, and start talking to editors, because you can really get a very clear and strong sense as you do that of which presses, which editors will be most interested in your work. So I think that's a really important key. The other thing is, in the humanities, you know, everybody talks a lot about the book shouldn't feel like a dissertation. And so you want to think about, as you're conceptualizing it, you want to think about making sure that you're making an intervention in the historiography, say, or the literature, whatever field you're in. But at the same time, usually any editor you talk to is going to say you want to not have your manuscript constantly talking about other scholars. You want to find subtle but really important ways to make your authority foremost. To, you know, in a sense, a book is about convincing the reader that you're an authority who should be trusted on this subject. And there are lots of really key ways you do that, partly through the way you cite your sources, partly through the way you write. You have to kind of take the reader by the hand in a way and make them believe in you, make them trust you as an expert, even as you're showing that, you know, in some significant and important way, you're changing how we think about this topic. All of those steps will make the book feel less like a dissertation and more like a really accomplished piece of mature scholarship.
Super, thanks, Julie. Amanda, would you like to weigh in?
Yeah, I think she's exactly right. I think you can't minimize this piece about building relationships with editors. Whenever I'm talking to somebody about thinking about where to publish their book, one of the first things I always say is, where of the things you're citing, where are they published? Where is there a conversation going on? Look at your bookshelf. Where are people publishing in the area that, you know, that is, you know, because they're often developing series, or, you know, presses are known for strengths in theory or in certain fields or whatever. And you want to, the chances of an editor being interested in your book are more likely in those kinds of places. It's important to talk to colleagues about their experience publishing in different places. I've now published with different presses, and some of them were really great in the editorial process, but not so great in the marketing. I mean, we do want eventually for folks to read our books. When my first book came out, I got really, you know, they kept running out of the book, and I mean, it's a good problem to have, but I thought, you just really, you know, and in one of my more recent book projects, it was with a very good press, but I didn't know that they had undertaken, now they export all the production process out of the country, and you know, to save money, but it made the process really frustrating. I mean, so there's all these things about the actual production of books that, you know, beyond just the content part, are really end up being super important parts of the process. And so even though it's intimidating to kind of think about reaching out to an editor or making, you know, that's what they're there for, and they're looking for great projects. And I think it's similar to a lot of things that I say to folks, which is that, like, work your network. So if you know somebody who's published with that press, reach out to them and see if they'll send, you know, just an introductory note to the editor. That helps. Or when you go to a conference, walk around the exhibit hall and actually introduce yourself. I mean, the editors are there, they're interested in meeting with people. So some of it has to do with just building those relationships, because then you can have meaningful conversations with people about the project. I will throw in it's interesting to hear different norms around doing edited volumes. Edited volumes, at least in my fields, are less and less common. When I talk to academic press editors, they're less and less interested in publishing them. I'd be interested in what folks at the U of I are saying. And having done one as a junior faculty member, I don't recommend it. I was halfway through the process when a senior colleague just said it was like herding cats, which is absolutely the case. And we had some wonderful, very senior people contributing chapters, and it was really hard to wrangle them to get them to turn them in on, you know, and I'm not going to say who, but at one point, somebody who's very eminent gave us something that was half-baked, and when we tried to say, okay, well, here's some edits, his assistant was like, well, go ahead and make whatever changes you want. In the end, we felt like we should be co-authors in the chapter. So they can be fun projects, but and we don't often think of it as like, it doesn't stand in for a single authored book. So I really caution people on doing that when they have tenure. So.
Thanks, Amanda. And actually, I think a lot of what you just said is relevant for journal publishing as well, particularly in terms of learning about different journals, speaking with your colleagues about their experience in publishing in different outlets, really understanding what the focus is of the journal and the perspective of the editor. Like, I have a journal that we traditionally have published in, and they used to have more of a prevention-oriented editor, and they changed editors who's now an epidemiologist. And so that editor is looking for very different types of articles than the prior journal editor. And so it really changed the frame. Likewise, through the pandemic, some journals have sort of fallen by the wayside and have really lost a step in terms of the timeline for the review process. I have to admit, as somebody, all of us, I think on this panel probably have this experience, but I usually get at least 1 to 2 invitations a week to review articles, and increasingly I just have to turn them down. I just don't have time. And I think that a lot of people submitted articles throughout the pandemic, and journals are just overwhelmed and they're having a hard time getting reviewers. And so the process for getting to review and getting through the review process is taking increasing longer. And there are some journals that are notoriously doing a better job than others. And so it's important to talk to your mentors and your colleagues to get a feel for that, so that you're not sitting around for 8 months waiting on that first publication or the 10th publication to come out because it hasn't even gotten reviewers yet. And so it's important to talk to your mentors and really be strategic, especially if you're in that initial phase of going up for your first promotion and or tenure, being really strategic about where you're going to submit journal articles so that you can make sure that they are published in a timely way so that they can be included in your dossier and be considered for your promotion and tenure. Stephanie, do you want to add anything to what I just said?
Thanks. No, I think all of you said it all. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I do have a question for you, Stephanie. So do you need to just publish in one type of discipline or journal for promotion and tenure? Or, what do you think?
I think it depends on the discipline. And for example, what are the major abstracting or indexing services used to identify your work? In the biomedical sciences, everyone knows is Medline, PubMed. And so whatever it is with journal articles for promotion and tenure and for your reputation, you need to show your expertise in legitimate peer-reviewed journals. And again, PubMed and the biomedical sciences is it for a variety of reasons we won't go into. But on the other hand, as another example, if you're a faculty member in business, you might be expected to do fewer articles, but they tend to be far lengthier, far more conceptually developing, not just based, than what we might be doing in the biomedical sciences, where we might do conceptual applications more often than developing new concepts. So some of those I've had the privilege of co-authoring with business faculty. I was shocked. The typical length in biomedical sciences might be 20 to 25 manuscript pages, double space. Theirs was more to 50 to 60 manuscript pages. You're thinking, is this a thesis? And they had to develop their own. And in business, while you might be, for example, you might be expected to have far fewer publications at P&T time than in the biomedical sciences, they have a list of tiered journals. They're going to say, this is the top tier. There might just be a few in your area that they call A, then A- journals. You have to have at least one. They might say 1 or 2. or you might have to have 2 to 4, whatever it might be in this second tier, it won't hurt you to have a few in the third tier C level, but it won't help you a lot. So that's why I say it depends on your discipline as to whether to publish in just one type of journal or others.
Thanks. And I work with a lot of colleagues in economics and law, and it's the same thing. You know, the econ papers, it could take a year to get an econ paper through the process, and they're extremely lengthy. The other thing that I find with some disciplines, having been through the P&T process for a long time, is in some disciplines like Stephanie and I in the health sciences, first and last author means something. But in other disciplines, author ordership doesn't mean anything. And so it's important to understand what's acceptable for your discipline. And then how do you recognize that in your promotion and tenure documents? And so at our campus, increasingly for faculty who are in disciplines like economics, where there is no standardization to authorship order, usually candidates or faculty members will annotate their dossiers to explain what their role was in that particular publication. They led the manuscript development, they led the analysis and the drafting of the results, whatever it may be, just to help the reviewers understand what the scholar's role was. Let's jump to another question. So what are the panel's thoughts on decoupling scholarship and publishing from purely promotional related concerns? Julie, do you want to start us off?
Sure. I love that question because I think that that's a really important point to make. We are intellectuals, scholars, working on our own trajectory. And it's really important to keep that in mind as related to, but separate from the P&T process. Bless you. And so I think it's really important to keep that in mind first and foremost. I mean, you have to be savvy about the P&T process. If you're tenure track or if you're clinical or professional track or whatever, you want to think about the guidelines. You want to know what the expectations are. You want to make sure you're cultivating mentors who can help you navigate through that process. But I do think there's a place for thinking about your own intellectual development as a separate issue. And so, for example, we were talking a minute ago about the issue of whether to co-edit a book or do work as maybe an associate editor of a journal. I agree with everything that was said about being cautious about that, super cautious. In terms of the promotion and tenure process. But I think it's a different issue in terms of your own intellectual trajectory. I think that when we look at impact, co-editing or editing a book isn't going to help you very much with impact in terms of the P&T process, but it can have a huge impact on your place in a field. It can be a way to really make your mark and get your name out there. It certainly helped me. I had a co-edited book come out right as my first book came out. And I'm sure that co-edited book wasn't very relevant to the P&T process, but I think it really helped me position myself in the field in terms of the things I cared about and wanted to work on. So I think that's a really key distinction to keep in mind. This is a vocation. We are intellectuals working on our own path. And then there's also the P&T process that's obviously really important. And I think this is especially important for any scholar who is not traditional tenure track. And as we know, there are more and more scholars like that, clinical professors, professional track professors, people who are working based on getting a course here and there. And so it's especially important to think about our own intellectual culture in terms of all of those categories, which obviously that's a really tough challenge. How do you keep your own intellectual path vibrant when you're in more difficult position, especially for contingent scholars or people who teach adjunct courses. But even there, then it's so important to take your own intellectual value really seriously and think about what you can accomplish to move yourself along the journey that you want to be on.
Super. Thank you so much, Julie, for that perspective. Would anybody else like to chime in on this question about decoupling scholarship and publishing from promotion and tenure related decisions or concerns?
I'll just say, you know, I think we always have to balance, you know, the pressures of the academy and our own values and particularly what got us into the field. And I mean, I know folks who are doing work they feel incredibly passionate about and are really and work that's having a lot of impact, but maybe not aligning with traditional publication outlets. But more recently, I think, you know, I've seen colleagues get promoted, particularly to full, with like doing public history kind of exhibitions, doing some really incredibly innovative and I would argue high impact work, but work that looks different. And, you know, it seemed risky at first, but I think they felt like if they were going to do this for their career, they needed to do work that really mattered to them and that they thought was going to matter to the communities that they were engaged in. So I think those are all really important questions. And you certainly want to be smart and you don't want to get in a position where, you know, you're not going to be able to meet the norms of the field you're in or be in jeopardy. But I also think we also need to kind of keep pushing these institutions we're part of to evolve and to, you know, like sort of like you were saying, Jamie, earlier, live up to their values. So if the institution's going to say they value engaged research, then they need to figure out how to incorporate that and recognize that it's going to translate into different kinds of publications and that sort of thing.
Super. Thanks, Amanda. I want to talk about this journal editing thing. You know, one thing, as Amanda and Julie were speaking about this, Amanda was really speaking heavily about edited volumes in particular, and I completely agree with what she said. The one thing to think about with journal editing is depending on what your norms might look like. For example, in my college, journal editing counts for service. It's not under scholarship. And so it could, as Julie was alluding, it's a great opportunity for career and professional growth and development and networking. So, you know, juxtaposing doing that type of work for service and career growth and development versus what's going to help you from a scholarship perspective on that part of your promotion package. So I would think about them somewhat differently, at least for journal editing versus scholarship and publication. Stephanie, do you want to talk about this question? And I just want to remind participants, we have about 6 minutes left. So if you have burning questions you would like the panel to address, please put them in the Q&A. We'd love to get your additional questions. But in the meantime, while we're waiting for any additional questions from the panel participants, Stephanie, what about open access publications? I don't know about you, but I certainly know that I get like requests for articles to submit to these plethora of open access publications on like a daily basis, things I've never heard of, journals. How do you navigate these things and figure out like what's a legit open access outlet versus maybe one of these predatory type publishers?
Thank you, Jamie. It's a good question because some open access publications are good. They're high quality, but the ones we get all the time where they say, "Dear Crawford, Stephanie, I know the bot has just taken it out of something." I have written a little bit about adherence to oral anti-cancer medication. That means taking by mouth rather than an infusion. I can't tell you how many invitations by email I get from open access, predatory in this case, dental journals because it says oral. They don't know it has nothing to do with dentistry. So you can tell a lot in different ways. And I ask others to come in terms of journal. If they say 2 to 3 days of a decision, you know that's not a journal you want to be involved with. And when I say that I don't mean just in terms of publishing, but they might also say, because of your eminence, we get that a lot in your field, and they'll do that to brand new professors in your first year. They'll say, we want you to be on our editorial board, or some of these others. You have to weigh it to yourself because the reputation of it will be considered later for you. But I would say, I would look at, again, where they abstracted, how much do they cost? We know there are article processing charges for some legitimate journals, but a lot of these more predatory, that's going to be the first thing they talk about. The quickness and the turnaround to a decision. And you can look at some of the papers that are published in those vehicles to help you determine, is this where I want to be associated? Jamie, you're muted.
Thank you. It was bound to happen one time. One of the participants reminded us in the chat that our librarians at our respective institutions are fabulous for helping to navigate open access publications. And that's probably one of the best places to start, besides talking with your colleagues and mentors and things like that. So we actually do have a question that just came in. Can you, anyone, provide some examples of published non-traditional scholarship works, such as in history and or the arts? Anyone have any examples? I think, Amanda, you referred to something a minute ago. So do you want to start?
Sure. So the question, well, it's tricky because you asked published non-traditional scholarship works. So in some ways, yeah, the product is the public. And, so like the examples that I'm thinking of are people who had to think about how to capture in some way that they had curated, produced. I mean, there's a huge amount of work in these public historical art exhibitions, that involve interviews and public life histories, all this stuff. But the product was not a traditional article or something. It was the exhibit. So you certainly have to think about how to capture that. I've also seen people I had a colleague who got recently promoted, and one of the big things she had produced was a collaborative website with some community organizations that involved these life histories that they were. So there's some really interesting and creative ones, and it partly was a collaboration with several different members of the community committee to think about how to represent that in the PNT papers and how to think about, because the other thing is it's a little tricky when you're sending things out to be reviewed in cases, right? What are you going to send to outside reviewers? That's always a little tricky. But I think those are some of the kinds of products I've seen people, and I'm sure, we don't have anybody here in the arts, but I'm sure there's lots of examples of how that's done in other fields. And I think people do, also write about them. So, you can get traditional publications out of other kinds of outlets, but I think part of the idea is that the exhibit or whatever itself is the product. So how do we value that and recognize it and think about it? So,
Julie, would you like to add anything to that question?
Yeah, I think I agree totally with Amanda. I think that a lot of universities are trying to rethink what's required, what is scholarship, how do we define it? Because with the digital turn, there's much more really interesting creative work being done in digital humanities, websites, that sort of thing. So I know we've had discussions at the University of Maryland about rethinking those definitions and standards. And, I think the principle that a lot of people come back to is, if, say, it is a digital humanities project or a website, does it make a significant contribution to knowledge? Does it intervene in the existing literature or historiography? I think those are all really important questions. And if I may, I see another question here about blogs and essays on your website. I don't know about you all in other disciplines, but I think in the humanities, I would characterize blogs and that sort of positioning yourself as a public historian, whether it's op-eds in newspapers or blogs or whatever, as kind of like co-editing books. It's something that can really help your intellectual development and your position in the field, but in the humanities, it's not going to count very significantly for promotion and tenure.
All right, well, with that, I think we need to wrap up. I want to thank my colleagues for this wonderful panel. I really enjoyed it. I have a motto that I learn something new every day, and I think I did learn at least one new thing today, so that's fabulous. And I hope that everyone who participated was able to take a nugget of guidance away from today's session. I'm going to turn it over to Lori, and thank you to UI Press for inviting us all to be here today.
Thank you, Jamie, and I want to thank you, Amanda, Stephanie, and Julie. Your comments have been so helpful today, and I think you know, the breadth of disciplines that was included was really fantastic. So just thank you so much. Everybody, we're going to take about a 10-minute break here, 9 minutes now. And so I invite you to take a little breather and then check back in at 5 minutes past 5. You do, or that's Central Time. You do need to log into the separate it's a separate link from this session. So you should have gotten that when you registered for the second panel. So thank you once again for everyone, to the panelists and participants. Thank you for being here. And we will see you in about 8 minutes. Thanks.
Thank you.